You have seen the image 1,000 times. A vast triangle of stone rising from the desert, perfectly symmetrical, so enormous it barely seems real. And every time you look at it, some part of your brain quietly refuses to accept that human beings built that. Without machines, without computers, without cranes or steel or any of the technology you rely on to build something as simple as a house. So your brain reaches for an easier answer. Aliens, lost civilizations, some secret knowledge that was wiped from history. Because the alternative seems impossible. The alternative is that a group of people, not that different from you, looked at empty sand and decided to build something that would still be standing 4,500 years later. But here is what nobody tells you. The real story of how the pyramids were built is not a mystery. It is not lost. The evidence is still there, buried in the desert, waiting in storage rooms of museums, scratched into the walls of ancient tombs. And once you understand what actually happened, the aliens stop being impressive and the humans become something far more extraordinary. Let us go back to the beginning. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2560 BCE during the reign of a pharaoh named Khufu. It stands 138 meters tall. It contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest structure on Earth. And for most of modern history, nobody was quite sure how it got there. Then, in 2013, something remarkable happened. A team of archaeologists discovered a papyrus. Not just any papyrus, the oldest papyrus ever found in Egypt. It was written by a man named Merer, and it was a logbook, a daily work journal, a record of what he and his team were doing during the construction of the Great Pyramid. Merer was an inspector. He oversaw a crew of around 200 men, and his job was to transport giant limestone blocks from the quarry at Tura, across the Nile, and to the pyramid site at Giza. His logbook recorded departure times, arrival times, how many blocks were moved, how many days the crew rested. It was essentially an ancient spreadsheet, and it confirmed something that archaeologists had suspected for years, but never been able to prove with such clarity. The pyramids were not built by slaves. This is the detail that surprises people most. The popular image, inherited from Hollywood films and an unfortunately mistaken reading of Herodotus, is of thousands of enslaved people being whipped across the desert under a brutal Egyptian sun. But Merer's papyrus tells a different story. His crew were paid workers. They received rations of bread, beer, and meat. They had sick days. They rested on a rotating schedule. They were fed well enough to do some of the most physically demanding labor in the ancient world. And Merer's crew were not alone. In the 1990s, a pair of American archaeologists named Mark Lenner and Zahi Hawass excavated the workers' village near the pyramid site. What they found was not a slave camp. It was a functioning town. There were bakeries capable of feeding thousands of people every day. There were breweries. There were medical facilities where workers were treated for injuries. And the skeletal remains showed evidence of successful bone surgeries and amputations that had healed. These were people who were taken care of, not disposable. But that still does not explain how you move 2 million stone blocks. Here is where the engineering becomes remarkable. The blocks did not walk there. Most of the limestone used to build the outer casing of the pyramid came from a quarry less than a kilometer away, right there on the Giza Plateau. The granite used for the interior chambers came from Aswan, around 800 kilometers to the south. And this is where the Nile changed everything. Egypt is a desert country threaded through its center by one of the world's great rivers, and every year the Nile flooded. During flood season, the water level rose and spread across the land, creating a vast natural highway of water that stretched right to the edge of the construction site. Merer's logbook records his crew sailing blocks downstream from Tura to Giza during the flood season, moving enormous weight with almost no effort, using the current and the Nile's own momentum. Water did what no number of human backs could have done alone. But the blocks still had to be moved from the water to the pyramid, and then upward, layer by layer, as the structure grew. So, how did they get them up? The most widely accepted theory, backed by experimental archaeology and ancient illustrations, is the ramp. Not one ramp, which would have needed to be kilometers long to maintain a workable slope, but a system of internal ramps built inside the pyramid as it rose, or external ramps that wrapped around the structure in a spiral, There is evidence for both. What is clear is that the Egyptians used sledges pulled by teams of workers, and that they poured water onto the sand in front of the sledge runners to reduce friction. A team at the University of Amsterdam tested this in 2014 and found that wetting the sand reduced the pulling force required by almost half. It was not magic, it was physics. And then there was the organization. This is perhaps the most underappreciated part of the story. The pyramid was not built by a mob of people randomly dragging rocks. It was a project of extraordinary administrative complexity. Lehner estimates that the workforce at peak construction numbered around 20,000 people. That is 20,000 people who needed to be fed, housed, supervised, coordinated, and kept working on a structure with tolerances so precise that the four base corners of the Great Pyramid are aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. That precision required mathematics. Egyptian surveyors used plumb bobs, set squares, and a tool called a merkhet to measure angles and alignments with extraordinary accuracy. They used water-filled trenches to level the base. They used a system of measurement called the royal cubit, standardized across the entire project, so that every worker and every team was using the same unit of length. The pyramid was not just an act of brute force. It was an act of coordination across thousands of people and decades of time. Khufu's pyramid is estimated to have taken around 20 years to build. 20 years of consistent, organized, funded labor. That is not a miracle. That is a plan. And here's the thing that should settle in your mind. The people who built the pyramids left traces everywhere. In Merer's logbook, in the graffiti workers carved into stone blocks in the deep interior. Graffiti that will never be seen by tourists because it is sealed inside the structure forever. One of those inscriptions names a team. They called themselves Friends of Khufu. They were proud of what they were doing. They signed their work. These were not reluctant laborers dragged from their homes. Many of them were conscripted through a system called the corvée, a labor tax paid to the pharaoh. But evidence suggests that working on the pyramid carried social status. It was considered an honor. You were building something for a god. You were participating in something permanent. And permanent it was. You have been looking at those pyramids your whole life through photographs, through documentaries, through films, and you have felt that quiet disbelief, that impossibility. But now you know what was really inside that image. Not mystery, not alien geometry. Just 200 men in a boat, a logbook, a river in flood, wet sand under a sledge, a team of workers who called themselves friends, and 20 years of not giving up. The image has not changed, but you have. Thank you for watching to the end. Comment pyramids if you made it this far. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you liked the video. Click here or here for more videos.